Alright, just got to get this, Sims side thought off my brain. Like, I don't know one really watches these things. I'm just ranting at a wall, basically, but I'm going to do it anyway. Just something I've noticed in the current political climate of this country that, seems to play on the old adage of, history repeats. And for those of you who don't know, the original three political parties in this country were the Labor Party, the Protectionists, and the Free Traders. Now, originally, the first PM that we had, he was a protectionist. Now, the Protectionists and the Free Traders, basically, they merged together to form, like, basically what we know as like a sort of like predecessor to the Liberal Party that we have today. There was a few iterations. You got Liberal, you got the Nationalists, then you've got United Australia Party, and then you have the Liberals that we have today. It's a bit confusing, but there's a common trend that sort of pops up a couple of times with them. Now, this merger, not all the protectionists like the idea, and those protectionists ended up jumping ship and joining the Labor Party and voting with the Labor Party at the time. But then a bloke called Billy Hughes came along there for a while. He was the leader of the Labor Party at a few different points. Now, he cracked the shits with the Labor Party over the conscription debate because the country didn't want conscription, and even most of the Labor Party who was in government at the time didn't want conscription. So he took the few people within the Labor Party that did want conscription. They jumped ship and they formed what was called Nationalist Labour. Nationalist Labour then ended up merging with those Liberals that I was talking about, merging with them to create the Nationalist Party. Now, eventually, and they were called the Fusion Party at some point or another. It's all fucking really confusing. But anyway, this, Nationalist Party would end up becoming, the United Australia Party after a few more, jumping of ships and splitting ups and arguments. And then after they got absolutely decimated during an election because Robert Menzies had messed up so bad by selling steel to the Japanese right before World War II and shit like that. Like, so eventually they actually all ended up, people called it a rebrand, but it was more they formed a new party called the Liberal Party, and everyone jumped ship from United Australia Party to the Liberal Party. It's basically a rebrand. Like they basically just rebranded the party. Now that would sort of go on until we have today, right? We get the Liberal National Coalition. So anytime they get in, it is a minority government. Whether people like it or not, it is a minority government anytime they're in because one or the other never really has the numbers. They kind of need the Nationals there. Now, they were originally the Country Party, and when they stopped giving a damn about the farmers and things like that, the Country Party rebranded to the National Party. That actually first occurred here in Queensland under what is arguably one of the worst or most corrupt politicians to ever sit in any state or federal parliament, and that was Bjorky Peterson. But anyway, now after the election that we recently had, the Liberal National Coalition suffered that much of a defeat that they're fractured, right? They're broken. They're not the great party that they once were, and it's evident by the fact that they lost a lot of their key players, and we're seeing something quite interesting. We're seeing bickering and arguments amongst what originally was like your two main sort of factions, your wets and dries, and then there was that midway that Scott Morrison formed, at one point or another, which was just kind of like a more tolerable dries, but they're still dries, like they were dries with a little bit of moisture. But anyway, now we're seeing this third, hard right sort of new faction arising within the remains of the Liberal Party, with Hastings and Price and all of that, right? And yeah, so they're all starting to bicker amongst themselves, and the sort of neutral pocket doesn't know what to do, and the so-called soft right, the dries with a bit of moisture under that Hawke bloke, they're, you know they're they're basically non-existent. Now, a lot of these advanced sort of like lobby groups, like Advance Australia, they're originally called, now they're called Advance. A lot of these big lobby groups are starting to see which way the wind's blowing. They know that the Liberals aren't going to recover from this. They're not. They're done. They're not going to. In fact, I'd be very surprised if they actually even pick up a couple of seats in a few years' time when we have our next federal election. So a lot of them are starting to prop up the question in social media and things like that of Labor or One Nation, who do you prefer, kind of thing, right? And then they're getting their bots and automated things to flood the comments with oh, Pauline all the way, this, that, and the other. So they're really trying to prop up Pauline Hanson now because they realise that, well, they've got these hard right crazies that are kind of the only ones that did vote for the Liberals in the last election, and so a lot of them are the only ones that really clung to their seats, apart from the wets that, well, the rich northern suburbs Sydney folks are always going to vote that way, or they're going to vote for the Teals. And so here's the prediction, right? I reckon that the Liberal Party that we have today, it is going to formally collapse in the next couple of years before the next election, and we are going to end up with not one but two other parties that are going to arise from that. I reckon, like, one I'm pretty confident on, and the other is a maybe. The one that I'm confident on is a lot of these hard right, extreme dry Liberals are going to, and a lot of the Nats and whatnot are going to jump ship, and they're going to jump in with One Nation, and that'll be who they'll want to go on a coalition. The Nats will want to go on a coalition with. Will be One Nation. And then from there as well, that's the one I'm absolutely confident is going to happen. Whether it's in the next few years before this election or after the next election, when they, and I say when, not if, when they lose really, really hard again. But yeah, and then the other one that's a maybe is the wets that remain jumping in with what they're calling the Teals, right? I swear I'm not independents. The Libs in denial, right? Like the Teals are just wets in denial, right? And so yeah, like we're gonna get those ones sort of actually formalizing and forming a party. That's a maybe. Again, I'll put that in the maybe, but I'd be actually kind of surprised if it didn't. But still, a maybe. But yeah, like, because here's the thing that a lot of these lobby groups and things like that are forgetting, and a lot of these crazies on the internet are forgetting is most of us, we don't really care about the party branding and that. We care about our own personal ideology. Like, we've got our own idea as to what a government should be doing and things like that. And more and more the Labor Party seems to be the only one that lines up with that, right? Like most of us are workers. Most of us are employed by someone. We're not business owners or anything like that. And so the natural option is going to be to vote Labor. Like, or at the very least, preference them above the Libs, the Greens, or One Nation. And then you got those few people that, back in the day, they probably would have voted for, that city, suburb, bloody independent candidate or Liberal candidate, and they vote Greens now. And this is something that people hate when I bring up, but like the original founding of the Greens Party was directly a middle finger to Labor. Like, Labor wanted to build a dam in Tassie, and a bunch of environmentalists thought it was a bad idea and whatnot, and it's just like, well, yeah, they formed an actual political party, a movement based out of independence and whatnot. They ended up formalizing and creating their own party, and that's the Greens Party that we have today. Like, this whole switching and changing with all these other parties happens all the time through our political history, but the only time that there's any ground from it is when you've got like a break off from one of the bigger parties, and it's usually the Labor Party that it happens, right? Like, I think it's twice now that it's happened, like, where, like, a bunch of folks have either walked from the Labor Party or walked to the Labor Party, because they are our oldest continuous party. And again, like, that rings with a lot of Aussies that don't really care too much about politics. They tend to stick with that whole line of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And so the ALP really hasn't changed in its entire, history. Like, I live in Queensland, the birthplace of the Labor Party, and oh yeah, so the state election, the Libs won, and Christopher Fullerton messed up so bad in his first few months, and he's still doing a terrible job, that a lot of folks switched by the time it came to the federal election that come around. Queensland was the one that rolled over to voting Labor in. And people go, oh, there's a difference between, federal and state. It's like, yeah, but most people don't actually understand that. They just get a letter in the mail saying they got to vote, so they go and vote. Like, they're not, heavily invested in the nitty gritty of it all. And so they're reactionary. When they see a party's messing up, they vote the other way. And at the moment, right, like, we've got this whole, giant group of, lobbyists with big pockets and whatnot, that are trying to convince us that the government we've got at the moment is doing terribly. But the simple fact of the matter is the only yubbos that will actually sort of support what these lobby groups are trying to say will sit there and say that oh, everything's getting too expensive, this, that, and the other, while paying, $5 to $7 for a schooner at the pub. And it's like, well, they may not understand the hypocrisy, but most of the people around them do. Like, again, like, we're not. And then the other one is immigration at the moment as well. Like, everyone's acting like we're Europe, right? They've got it in their heads that our immigration issues are Europe's immigration issues, where they've got, people flooding across the borders and, basically taking advantage of the system. We don't have that here. We don't. Like, the majority of, like, migrants, the vast majority, they come here to work. And they do work. Like, hell, they're working more than most of us, pasty looking, European descended Aussies, right? Like, and that's the thing, right? Like, a lot of these arguments that these fucking weirdos and meth heads will fucking come up with to support their, extreme right-wing views. And I hate to use the term right-wing, because, like, I'm a conservative. Like, if I'm to actually pick a political ideology that I actually stand behind, I'm a conservative. And that's why I vote Labor. Because right now, 50% of the Labor Party members that sit in the federal parliament are, on that, what they call Labor right. And the Labor right just means the more conservative, protectionist influenced part of the party, where it's like, whereas the Labor left are the more progressive, trying not to let the Greens get more seats from them side of the party. That's what that means within the Labor Party, of left and right. But you've got both of those sort of, I won't say factions, because there's a couple of factions within those as well. But, those two main sort of groups that exist within the Labor Party. Like, and yeah, like, I just don't see the Liberals being able to compete with that centered coalition of, thought. And so they will have no choice but to jump ship. Like, but the problem is with that is One Nation. What does One Nation stand for? Like, what's their actual ideology? They're not conservatives, they're not progressives, they're not libertarians, they're not liberals. If anything, like, the only word you could really put to them is fascist. Like, as in, and I don't mean that in the, oh, they're fascists. No, I mean that in the ideological sense. Like, the fascist ideology that Mussolini, defined. And he actually did define it. He did literally write the book on what fascism was. And because that's the thing, like, it's slightly different from what they call National Socialism or, Nazis, which is, Hitler's whole shtick. But that's the thing, right, is like the Labor Party, that's a, you know, they're not an ideology in its own, but there's competing ideologies that agree. But it's still underpinned by the principle of workers' rights, like putting the worker, the small guy first. You know, and those that, you know, where else are we going to get the voice, right? Like, and that's why it's funny. They're the ones that put forward the referendum for the voice, to give a voice to a group that doesn't really have one in Parliament. That's the whole point of the Labor Party. Like, but yeah, like, whereas One Nation, again, it's really hard to see what they stand for. Like, the Liberals themselves, right? People try and say they're the Conservative Party, this, that, and the other. Like, no. Their ideology is actually in their name. They are a liberal party. Like, the liberal ideology is what, you know, influences them the most. They are liberal in the sense of they're just liberals for rich people, right? That's the people that they want to have all the freedom in the world. Rich people, like, and then, you know, I don't know anymore. Right. There's my little rant, and there's my prediction that One Nation is going to be the next one that these, you know, the big end of town actually starts backing, because they don't really have any other choice. And Susan Ley and her wets are probably going to jump ship at the same time, and, you know, or the wets at that point will be able to bring on the teals bring the teals back into the fold, because then the Liberal Party will be the actual Liberal Party again, as opposed to having the Dries, which are basically the Nats that are a part of the Liberal Party, because that's what the Dries really are. Like, they're those, you know, it's back the you know, the mining industry. Let them, you know, absolutely destroy our landscape and take our resources and not have us see any of it. And the Nats, well, yeah, like, they don't give a shit about farmers. And to be quite frank, like, that's why I actually do have hopes for Katter's Australia Party. The smartest thing he could do would actually be to rebrand that, taking his name out of it and taking Australia out of it, and actually framing it for farmers again, because as much as I don't agree with Bob Katter or his son, or, you know, the whole, like, party sort of idea, they are a voice for farmers. Like, you can't deny that they are actually a voice for farmers. If a farmer bloke up in North Queensland walks up and says his piece to Bob Katter will listen. Like, and yeah, like, that's kind of where I'm coming from there. Like, we need to get back to, and we always do find a way to get back to, the name of the party actually representing its values, and a party actually having values, whether we agree with them or not, having values. Because a good government deserves a good opposition. And we've got a fucking awesome government at the moment, and it deserves a fucking good opposition to go against it. It deserves that. Because that's how democracy's supposed to be. Anyway, put the Libs and the Greens last. Oh, and One Nation, you know, somewhere down the bottom there as well. Because fuck Pauline, she's a fucking whiny little cunt.